So this book is a good example of why I have a love-hate relationship with the occult industry that produces thousands of books on the topic of ancient traditions and ancient cultures. So if you want to see why I feel this way and the good and the ugly of this kind of work, stay tuned. Welcome to Biblioccultist, where I review books that I find interesting in the topics of religion, history, philosophy, and fiction. Please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video. Doing these things really helps the channel out. In this episode, I will go over Tantric Physics Volumes 1 and 2 by Craig Williams. This edition is from 2020 by Anathema Publishing. As I said before, I do love their editions. This one in particular is a beautiful hardcover one that combines both volumes and is actually a numbered edition. You probably can find this same edition, even a numbered one, out there online if you want to have the same experience, but like I've said before, a softcover would do the trick as well. Now, the basic of this book is the author trying to present what he calls Vedic gnosis, or knowledge, to the occult world. And ironically, he actually correctly criticizes the makeshift nature of these kinds of studies, usually how they're presented in a somewhat disjointed and eclectic approach, which is very common in the occult world, in which you have practitioners of the left-hand path, as it is called, who take information from ancient sources like Egypt and Sumeria and ancient Rome and ancient Norse legends and the Vedic sources, what people call Hinduism, and they create a mishmash of these traditions to somewhat come up with an authentic flair to their work. Now, ironically, this New Age approach and sensibility permeates all occultic work in the modern world to such a degree that I don't think this author is able to divorce himself from the problem. Because Sanatana Dharma, which is the proper name of Hinduism, it's not a laissez-faire New Age experience, but an actual religion with actual sects and schools of thought and philosophical systems and very ancient traditions. And although the author criticizes those that mix up everything up in one bowl of soup, the truth of the matter is that this work kind of does the same. And I understand why the author is trying to speak to a particular audience who is actually used to this kind of mood and trying to introduce them to this information. But the book actually mixes multiple lineages and hybridizes certain moods. One good example is his mention of Achintya Bheda Abheda Tattva, which is really a Gaudiya Vaishnav tradition, a very particular lineage from a man called Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who was a mystic and a religious reformer who founded a particular school of thought, and today has millions of adherents. But it is an actual religion, an actual theological system. It is not simply a left-hand path occultic approach. And he takes this idea and he mixes it up a little bit with the worship of Kali Ma, which is its own tradition and its own religious path with scholars within it, history, and perspectives. So by matching them in the particular way that he does, he is actually doing the same thing that he seems to be criticizing. Now again, my intention here is not to be overly critical. I am simply taking the book as it is presented, and again, I do find it very pleasant to read, but at the same time, I can see the same issue that he himself seems to criticize. As an example, he speaks of the left-hand path and its practitioners, whose purpose, he mentions, is to isolate themselves cosmically. And simultaneously, he mixes this with the notion of karma, of releasing yourself from karma. But you see, these two ideas are, in reality, incoherent, which is actually the reason why it is not a good idea to mix up traditions. I've seen, for example, people that mix hardcore Theravada Buddhism with Protestant Christianity. I've actually seen online dress up like Buddhist monks, and then at the same time they hybridize it with Franciscan sensibilities. Well, all that is very interesting and creative, and I can appreciate creativity, artistically speaking. But once you do these things with theology and philosophy, you create ironic situations. Not everything mixes well in the world of ideas and concepts and systems. I can mix up reggae with black metal, and I can probably get something interesting. But that is in a completely different realm. But taking that same approach and applying it to theology is absurdly problematic. The whole idea of cosmic isolation is incoherent with Sanatana Dharma, because the closest you're going to get to this idea would be the destruction of the self, which would be something like nirvana. But even in that notion, there's still a collective viewpoint, because for you to reach nirvana, it is, in a sense, emerging into an absolute collective, to such a point where you lose your individuality and your sense of self. Whereas the cosmic isolation notion of the left-hand path is about exalting your individuality to such a point at which you are in your own cosmic island. And this is incoherent with the notion of nirvana. And that's just one example of the problem of mixing and matching these kinds of thoughts. Now again, the book correctly advocates for the initiation in a particular lineage of accepting a guru, accepting their authority, and then to follow the rules, to follow the tradition. But again, this field is not left-hand path. It is a right-hand path approach. So by trying to entice the left-hand path to get acquainted with these ideas, which is a very laudable concept, the book at the same time seems to want to have its cake and eat it too. It wants to convince the left-hand path practitioner to take into consideration these ideas, but without telling them straight up that these ideas are primarily of the right-hand path, and that once you get into a traditional orthodox structure in Sanatana Dharma, you are in the right-hand path. It's not going to be antinomian. It's not going to be individualistic. It will be a traditional religion, which to me is perfectly okay. But to many in the left-hand path worldview, it is completely unacceptable, because these people are in that particular viewpoint to get away from actual religion and actual disciplines, or at least disciplines that are collective, that are structured, that are dogmatic. But if you do follow the rules and regulations of a traditional lineage in Sanatana Dharma, you must follow those things. And if you don't, the system will not work, because it is a system by definition. Now, Volume 2 is indeed my favorite of the work, because I think that Craig Williams shines in that section by finally going into his creative pocket. And he now can take a lot of the beautiful esoteric aspects of the vast pool of information and poetry in Sanatana Dharma, and he can take that and he can explore it mix it up, combine it, reinterpret it, and all that is actually wonderful. It is really his best work. It makes the book absolutely worth it for me, because at that point, you can actually enjoy the work. The first part of the book is primarily a very interesting lecture on the dynamics of Hinduism and the left-hand path, how they could, in theory, do well together. And in that case, some of you may disagree with him, and some of you may agree, because I'm simply sharing my thoughts on this. Other people may disagree with me and say, no, they actually mix well together. It is true that the term left-hand path actually comes from Sanatana Dharma anyway. That's where Helena Blavatsky got it from. So why not mix it up? And that's fine. But I would say you would have to stick to the tantric left-hand path, the original one, and the Indian tradition, but not necessarily go into the right-hand path and try to extract things from it to grant legitimacy to something that you're doing on your own. Like I said, other people can disagree, and you can discuss in the comments below. Now, I would like to cite a piece in that second volume that I do find wonderful, and it is an allusion to the Srimad Bhagavatam, or the Bhagavata Purana, which is an absolutely beautiful work. So here's the quote. O Sri Bhagavan, I see you in every expression of life, every expression of sorrow, every expression of pain, every expression of hate. Is there any place you do not inhabit? Grace me with the eyes of bhakti, so that I may be blessed with your constant presence. I do not care what the blind may say when they witness my intoxication with your darkness. They have no faith. They have no devotion. How can they begin to understand your mysteries? Now, what I like about that short verse there is that it explores the idea that Krishna, which is the focus of the Gaudiya Vaishnav tradition, is a dark lord in the sense of being tantric, of being antinomian. And the truth is, when you look at the story of Krishna, it does contain this element. Because unlike Vishnu or any other manifestation of God, Krishna, if he is seen as the source of all emanations of God, meaning the one God being Krishna, then he does seem to be somewhat of a trickster. He doesn't follow rules. He is outside of the parameters of dogma. And I can understand why that would be attractive to people of the left-hand path. But Krishna is not studied in isolation. He is within a particular structured theological perspective. He is unique because he is within that perspective and understood within it as part of a bigger story, a bigger purpose. Krishna is outside of the rules because he created the rules. In other words, there are rules. There is such a thing as dogma and belief and philosophy and epistemology and ontology, etc. All the theological infrastructures that make a religion function include this point of view. If you look at the Bible, St. Paul talks like this about how God is outside of the rules, that God has its own categorical explanation, its own existence outside of created reality. And Krishna serves the same function. He is outside of karma, but he created karma. He is outside of time and space because he created time and space. If you think time and space are just some chaotic, nonsensical experience that is independent of your own personal spiritual isolation, you are in the wrong system, because those beliefs don't match with the very notion of devotion to Krishna. The idea is beautiful and it sounds right. When you go deep into it, some of these concepts don't match. But just on the surface, it is a beautiful exploration and a nice presentation of devotional sentiments that are very common in many traditions in India that still exist to this day. So, to close here, this very short review, if the objective of the book was to introduce occultists to the Vedic spiritual concepts and mood, it does a wonderful job. Those of you who are familiar with that world, or who are even initiated in that world, and who see it as their actual religion, they may find it a bit disturbing or cringy, because they will recognize that a lot of this is just another New Age approach to their actual system. To those that are not familiar with these things, I think actually this book would be a wonderful introduction, especially if you come from that left-hand path persuasion, because it will entice you to consider these ideas. But I do believe that if you go on that route, it will eventually lead you to the right-hand path. And I don't see a problem with that. If you're a true explorer of spirituality, there's nothing wrong with going from left-hand to right-hand path, at least as part of your journey. So like I said, mixed feelings on it, but it is actually a great book, and I do recommend it, and you can decide for yourself how you feel about the book or what you think about the book, and you can go from there. So again, I hope that this review was in any way useful and, at the very least, educational. So please remember to subscribe to the channel, click the bell for notifications, like the video, share the video, and comment on the video, and I'll be more than happy to engage you there. Thank you for being with me. See you next time.